Hello, welcome to my channel. We're the guys for photography. Today we are inside ON1 Photo Raw 2022, but that doesn't really matter because we are going to work with curves. So this video applies to any software that actually has curves to work with, particularly RGB curves. What we are going to try and do today is to learn to read the histogram, learn to do tones or change tones with the curves. And we are also going to touch on the RGB side of curves, so red, green, blue. The first thing we need to know when working with curves is how to read the histogram. The histogram is a big part of curves, at least it is to me. I need to use the histogram personally when I'm doing things with curves. The histogram tells me the color tones, it tells me where we have details and where we have no details, and it tells me if it's spread out correctly, if we have a low dynamic image or a high dynamic image. So the first thing is how to read the histogram. So this is of course the histogram, and the histogram starts from the left with blacks, and the blacks are about to around here, maybe, yeah, here, and then the shadow starts. So we have blacks, shadows, and the shadows goes to around here maybe, and then the mid-tones start from about here to about here, then the highlights starts to around here or maybe even there, and then the whites start. Really the shadow and the white or highlight part of the histogram is a bit bigger than what I showed, but this is about around where you find the different tones. So you never want to have an image where you're pushing or crushing the blacks too much like this. You can see that the spike here goes all the way to the left and outside the left. And this means that when we have this much black, the image simply will cut off the blacks and we don't have any details where the black is. You can see this by activating the clipping warning that we are crushing the blacks too much. If we were to print this image, it would simply only print it in black. There wouldn't be any details at all. It would simply just be visible to us as complete black. So it's better to have the blacks almost touching the left bottom corner. It's the same for the highlights. So if we go up on the exposure and maybe up on the whites, you'll see that we are introducing or clipping the whites. We are pushing the whites outside the histogram. So whenever you have an image that's pushing the whites outside of the histogram, you are clipping, and this is something that you don't want to do. Most cameras can actually tell you if you are clipping by reading the histogram when you're viewing your images. So you shoot, and then you can go in and view the image and see the histogram. So if the histogram are around here, you have problems, you should probably expose differently. The same if you have the histogram all the way to the left, you are probably crushing the blacks and you should expose differently. Now, like this image is an image of the sunset, and I'm shooting straight into the sun. You will never be able to do a perfect exposure If I were to expose for the sun only, I would have to lower the exposure value of my camera too much, because I wouldn't have any details in the shadows or blacks. If I were to expose for the blacks only, I would blow out this entire area. This would be clipped. We would only have whites here. So that's not good. So you have to balance somewhere in the middle there. You can see the histogram here. We have more details in the blacks or shadow area, and a ton of details in the midtones, but we don't have too much tones for the highlights and the whites. So I hope this is clear. Many people prefer to have kind of a mountain top in the middle. And that's fine. If you're going for that, that's fine. You will probably have details in the blacks and details in the highlights if you're shooting like that. Many people also prefer to have, and I'm going to draw this out with my mouse, so follow the cursor, but many people prefer to have a histogram going up like that and have kind of a valley in the midtones and up like that and down again. Many people think that's a perfect histogram, and I would tend to agree. But we do also want high peak in the shadows and high peak in the highlights. This is all about contrasts and high dynamic. And of course we want high dynamic range for a landscape photo. Maybe you don't want that for a portrait. Maybe you want a flat kind of look on a portrait. And that's of course completely okay. Then you would push everything and compress the histogram. And I'm going to show you how to compress the histogram first here. So let's head into effects. And we are going to create a curve. So this is the curve. And you can see we have a line going diagonally over the entire curve area. So we need to know how to read the curve, or how the curve works. So this is a general tone curve. We have all activated. That means that we are working on all the channels. So the red, green, blue, and the complementary colors for each. So red, turquoise, green, magenta, blue, yellow. So the curve, it starts from the left side and it's the same again. So we start from completely black, shadow area, midtone area, highlight area, white area. And you can see that by the bar down here. This means that whenever we are pushing the tone curve down, we are darkening the image. So if I go from the midtones here and push this down, you can see that I'm darkening the image. If I go to the midtones again and push it up, you will see that I'm brightening the image. And you see this arch, that's how a curve works. So if you're pushing from any area and you only have 1 point or 3 points, this is a point and this is a point as well. But if you only add 1 point and push either to the left or up or down, then you are introducing light if you push up, and introducing blacks if you push down, and you are affecting the entire curve, all the tones. You might not want to do that. In this case, we might not want to brighten the highlights too much, so we can put out more points. So I can put a point in the midtones, maybe in the shadows, and one for the highlights. And let's say I want to brighten up stuff, but I don't want to brighten the sun too much. I can then push up the midtones and maybe even the blacks or shadows just a bit. And we are protecting the highlights mostly. Midtones and highlights are pretty close to each other. So whenever you're pushing the midtones, you might actually affect the highlights as well. But you can try and place another point here, so we aren't affecting it too much. And of course, the sun is still blown, but yeah, it's actually quite nice. You can get this border around the sun, or kind of a black circle around the sun, and that looks ugly, so you want to avoid that. All right, so now we have toned just a little bit with the curve. Let's try and compress the histogram. So to compress it, I want to place a point in the mid-tone area, in the shadow area, and in the highlight area. Now I want to push everything to the mid-tone area, or at least as much as I can to the mid-tone area. So I want to up the blacks because we have too much stuff in the shadows. So I'm upping the blacks just a bit. You can't do too much because then you're going to wash out the details. So that will look pretty ugly. And I want to compress the highlights. So you can see what we are effectively doing now. We are pushing the histogram more into the middle. And let's try something like that. So now we have a good starting point to set a black point and a white point. So I'm going to add another curve like this. And to set the black point, I'm going to push this bottom left dot to the right side. And I'm doing that. We can activate the histogram clipping warning. And I'm doing that until I'm crushing some blacks. So the blue area now, that tells me that the blacks are crushed, but I'm going to leave it like this. So it's fine that it's just a little bit crushed. It would be bad if it's something like this, but we can back it off and go for something like this. And I also want to do the same for the whites or the highlights. I want to set the white point. I'm going to ignore the sun, or I'm going to watch out so the sun doesn't get too blown, but it's already blown. So I'm going to ignore it for now. So I'm going to push this point, the top right point, to the left side. This will introduce more whites and highlights. And I'm going to push it over to something like this maybe. I'm going to deactivate the histogram so I can see how the sun looks. It doesn't look too good, so let's back it off. I think to maybe around there. Okay, so now we have a lot of details in the midtones, and we can of course push up the midtones just a bit to push it more over to the highlights. And let's just activate the clipping warning again. Yeah, it looks okay, I guess. Yeah, it's not perfect, but we can try and tweak for that later. But at least now we have a okay black and white point. So this is without, and you can see that it's pretty flat because there's almost no contrast in the image right now. And then we have a white and black point, and we have some more contrasts, and the histogram is spread out a bit more. All right, so now we can play with the curves, maybe try and add some more contrast actually. So we go to add filter and curves again, and we can we can try and do a S-shape curve. So a S-shape normally looks something like this. So we place 1 point in the shadows and 1 point in the highlights, and you pull down the shadows just a little bit and up the highlights just a bit. And that introduces even more contrast. So let's pull it up just a bit more. And I'm just gonna activate the clipping warning again. Yeah, that's fine. And the shadows just up a bit there. And this is without the S shape, and this is with the S shape. And I think that works pretty well. Okay, so now we have 3 curves. I don't expect that you are going to build up curves like this. This is just me showing you how to do different stuff inside the curves. Some software don't even allow you to use more than one curve. Some software you can add a new copy or duplicate the layer, the entire image, and then do another curve that way. So you can end up with a few layers with copies of your images. But that's fine usually. It doesn't cause any problems to do it like this. ON1 Photo Raw 2022 allows you to add how many curves you want, I think. Maybe there's a limit. But ON1 Photo Raw 2022 is excellent in this way. We can add all of the filters again and again and again. Yeah, so let's just jump in and do some curves with the RGB channels. So we can start with the red channel, and the red channel, if you push up on the red channel, you are introducing more reds. But if you pull it down, you are introducing turquoise color tone. That's important to know, of course. So let's just introduce some more reds in the highlights. And we know where the highlights, shadows, and the midtones are. So this is the shadow area. This is the midtones. And the highlights are somewhere up here. And if we want, we can push more reds into the image by pulling up, for example, the highlights like this. And maybe we want to go for an artistic look and introduce the complementary color for red, which is turquoise, in the shadows. Just a bit. This is, of course, too much. I'm just going to show you how that would work. And you can see that we are introducing this into the shadow area. Now let's pull that up to maybe around there. We can try that. So this is without this curve, and this is with the curve. And it's a bit too much in the highlights. Okay, so we can go for the green channel. So it's the same way there. Up, we are introducing greens. Down, we are introducing magenta. So the complementary color. Okay, so let's introduce some magentas in the highlights. Like this. And that can work for this image. Maybe some in the midtones as well. Just a little bit. And this is without the curve settings, and this is with the curves. And you can see that we are starting to get an interesting look, at least in my opinion. Oh, so let's go into the blue channel, and we are going to see the same here. if we pull up, we are introducing more blues. If we are pulling down, we are introducing yellows. So all the time we are doing stuff with complementary colors here. I might want to go for a more yellow look in the highlights. So let's push that up just a bit. That's blue. Let's pull it down. Sorry. To somewhere around there. Maybe I want to play with the midtones, maybe more blue in the midtones, so we get a contrast in a way, or warm up the image even more and pull down to the yellows. I'm actually thinking maybe go up a bit on the blue and maybe do the same in the shadows. So this is this tone curve, and you can clearly see what it's doing. To do stuff like this, let me add another curve. So let's say you want to introduce yellows into the highlights, in this case the sky, and you pull up like this, you are actually introducing yellows into the midtones and into the shadows. So you need to make sure that you place points out to protect the shadows and the midtones if you don't want to change those areas. So that's how you do that. And this actually worked great. We introduced some more blues in the highlights. Yeah, that's fine. I'm hoping I set this all correctly now. Sometimes I confuse myself, and I hope it's clear to you how curves work and how to read the histogram. So let's just do a summary for the histogram again. So from the left you have the blacks to around here, I would say. Then the shadow starts, and that goes all the way up to here. This is just about, it's hard to see in ON1 Photo Raw because you don't have the grid in the histogram. Other software has grid in the histogram, so it makes it easier to read out. But anyway, from here to about here is where the midtones are. And then you have the highlights, and then you have the whites. And you can see that we are crushing some blacks and we are clipping some whites. But that's okay in this case. So maybe we want to add a vignette and do a big softy. Now, what we've done now is to tone this entire image just by using curves. We haven't even touched anything in the develop module yet. So this is a good time to start doing that, because this is the final tuning of this image. But it's pretty amazing that we have gone from this to this simply by using curves, and of course the vignette. So let's go and fine tune this image. Maybe I want to go up a bit on the shadows to somewhere around there. Maybe I should play with the contrast just a bit. Yeah, it's fine. We can of course go up on the midtones, but be careful when going up on the midtones, because the midtones and the highlights and the shadows overlap. So going up on the midtones means that you are pushing everything to the right side, so you are introducing more highlights and more whites. So be careful with that. You can see that by the histogram, that when I go up on the midtones, we are starting to clip. So maybe go to somewhere around there. And now you can see that we have a pretty good and even histogram. We have a valley where the shadows ends and the midtone starts, but that's fine. We can try and push it more and get more details in this area, but I don't think it's necessary. We can fine-tune the whites and the blacks. And of course, if we need to, we can drop the highlights just a bit. But I don't think we need to do that. We did that in the curves, so we should be safe. And of course, we can go down and check the white balance. And maybe dehaze the image, that it creates more contrast. Somewhere around there. And maybe more vibrance. And a little bit more magenta. And we could go in and, for example, do dynamic contrast. And I don't know, maybe glow. Normal. And let's just go up a bit on the shadows. And that's an interesting look. So we went from this to this by using curves, and we spent maybe 20 seconds doing the fine toning of this image. So curves are extremely powerful. And you should absolutely learn how to use curves and how to read the histogram. This gives you more freedom, in my opinion. I like to use curves, and I do it a lot. It's so good when you know how to do it, because it gives you a lot of control. So do try and use curves, play around with the color channels, learn the complementary colors, so the red, turquoise, the green, magenta, and the blue and yellow. I think that's it for this video. If you want to buy ON1 Photo Raw or try it, click the link in the description. That's an affiliate link, so it gives me just small amount of money, or you can simply go to on1.com. Yeah. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you want to watch more from me, hit that subscribe button. And if there's anything you want to ask about curves or anything else, hit that comments, and I will reply as soon as I see your post. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you again. Goodbye.